Hello, I'm Bob Cialdini, a behavioral scientist and author of the book Influence, as well as the new book Pre-Suasion. And I'd like to tell you about a series of video interviews I've conducted with individuals who I admire and who have written about behavioral science not just for the academic community, but as well for the larger community. Individuals such as Dan Ariely, Adam Grant, Amy Cuddy, and Richard Thaler. In this series of interviews called Cialdini Asks, I try to get beneath the surface and behind the scenes, inquiring into the motivations that spurred the work of these individuals and their decisions to write about it for a popular audience. I also asked them about aspects of their work that exceeded their expectations in terms of impact, as well as those aspects of their work they felt have been most underappreciated. I even asked them to tell us a funny story or revealing one that nobody knows about them and their work. I know that in the process, I have been surprised, fascinated, and informed by their answers. I hope that the same will be true for you. So I do hope that you will look out for and tune in to the Cialdini Asks video series as we make it available online over the next several weeks. Thanks. Hi, Amy.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Well, I'm looking forward to the opportunity to chat a little bit. And I'm a big fan of your research, but I was especially taken with your book presence. Can you tell us about the series of events that led up to your decision to write that book? That is, what made you decide to turn the research covered there into something directed not just to the academic community, but to the larger community?
Yeah, it's funny. I always thought that if I wrote a book, it would be, first of all, I'd have to wait for the book to exist in my head before I would sign any kind of contract to write it. I would not say, oh, this is an interesting idea, I'm going to explore it. I had to really feel ready to write it. And that is what happened with Presence. But it was a kind of, I think, unusual path for an academic because my TED Talk, which I gave in 2012, became very popular before I had a book, and while I was a very junior faculty member, and so I really wasn't ready. And of course, I had a lot of people saying, "Oh, write a book on power posing," and I thought I don't want to write a book just on power posing. Right. So what happened was that I allowed the people who had watched the talk and who reached out to me either over email or in handwritten letters, which are so beautiful to get, or people that I met at airports or just on the street or in shops. It's amazing, from all over the world. They, in an unexpected way, guided me to this topic of presence, because what I found is that these literally tens of thousands of people didn't write and say, oh, I power posed and I felt my hormones change. They talked about challenges that they had faced in their lives. And I mean, I'm talking about, a 13-year-old girl in mainland China who was working up the courage to speak up in class or to learn, one who wanted to learn English. An elderly man in Florida, a retired World War II veteran who said he had lost his sense of pride and he needed to gather the courage every time he went to talk to his doctor in order to be treated like a human and not like not be dehumanized. But the challenges seemed very different, but there was a thread through them. And it was that people felt the stakes were high in these challenges. They really cared about it and the outcome mattered to them. And they also felt this profound sense of being socially judged. And the thing that helped them get there was to feel personally powerful, not to feel power over others, but to feel the power to do things. And something about the talk had sort of helped them move in that direction, but they were doing it in all different ways. And what would happen in those moments when they felt powerful is that they felt they could actually connect with the person who they had seen as threatening. The
Mm.
person they had seen as threatening no longer became threatening. They became a possible ally or a peer. And they were able to leave those challenges feeling a sense of satisfaction instead of regret. That that became the book I wanted to write. Not just a book about body language, but a book about how we face these daily
Yeah.
small challenges uh, that we face, whether we have very little formal power or a lot of formal power. And I felt so much connection with people as a result of giving the TED Talk. I realized that was my place in a way. Um, I really wanted to connect more outside of academia. I grew up in a small rural town in Pennsylvania, in a place where very few people went to college. And so I never felt fancy. I never have felt like I belonged at these places like Princeton and Harvard. I want to talk to people outside those places.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that um, those accounts that you described made you feel ready to write the book. But it seems to me they also make people ready to read it by experiencing those accounts. People outside of the
Yeah,
academic
it's interesting.
community want to know about that kind of connection. There's meaning there besides whether the data are significant beyond 0.05. There was something there about that set of accounts that gave you the ability to know what you were doing and then to
That's
do
right.
it in a way that was truly able to touch people. Yeah,
Thank
which I
you.
think accounts for a lot of the success of that book.
Thank you. I do think people see themselves in these stories and they feel less alone. And one of the things I hear most often from people who write to me is that they didn't realize other people felt like imposters.
Uh,
And just learning, it's so to me, for me, and you know how a huge a fan I am of your work, and everything relates back to it in a way. So I always think, oh, it's social proof, right? So for people to just learn that others feel like an imposter in a
yeah,
way allows them to feel less frightened by the idea that they feel like an imposter.
right.
So I think that's part of the ability to connect, is to share sort of vulnerabilities. But thank you.
Yeah. Well, let's go on to the next question. That's proven to me. Someone once asked me this question, and I thought it was revealing when I reflected back on the answer to it for myself. But here's the question to you. Of all the work you've done, what would you say has been most underappreciated? And why do you think that is?
Mhm. That's interesting. Yeah, and I've been thinking about this. I can think of one paper, um, but also sort of a larger phenomenon. I think that I'm actually by training a stereotyping and prejudice researcher, and
Right.
most of my research is on how we misperceive other people, the biases that we have in our perceptions of others. And so, although I do think that work is appreciated in the social psychology community, I think people are less aware of it outside, and that's
Mm-hmm.
just sort of a function of having an idea that became really popular.
Uh-huh.
Uh, but the paper that I one of the papers on stereotyping that I have been working on for years, and uh, thought would be more impactful than it was,
Yeah.
um, is a paper on how culture shapes the content of gender stereotypes. And that paper, from beginning of data collection to publication, took 10 years.
Oh.
It was a cross-cultural paper. We collected data in Korea and the US. We ended up running many, many studies and then doing a huge sort of reanalysis of 27 countries, data from 27 countries. And the takeaway is that people believe the stereotype that women are more sort of interdependent and collectivistic. They think that is a universal stereotype, that men are everywhere seen as more independent
Mm-hmm.
and women as more interdependent. That's not the case. It
Oh.
turns out where interdependence is valued, like East Asian cultures, men are seen as more interdependent
Ah.
and women as less interdependent. So that was such a a big project. I thought it was I thought it was a very big sort of theoretical contribution to understanding gender stereotypes
Yeah.
and how culture interacts with them. And I think just in the wake of the power posing work, it just sort of went under the radar.
Mm.
But I'm still very sort of interested in that idea and understanding how, as cultures change, gender stereotypes will change as well.
Fascinating. As I say, I'm a big fan of your work, and as you say, that particular study is not one that I had on my radar screen. So,
That's
but I
okay.
see now that you've mentioned it, how insightful that conclusion is for understanding how the stereotype process works. So
Thank
I'm
you.
glad we had the chance to bring some
Me too.
prominence to it.
Thank you.
But let's ask the flip side of that question. Of
Okay.
all your work, what has surprised you most in terms of its big impact? That is beyond your expectation.
Yeah, well, I mean, it has to be the power posing idea, and for there are two sides of that coin. On the one hand, I love the simplicity I love the idea of giving people self nudges, ways to improve their own lives,
Mhm.
as opposed to, I like the nudge idea, of changing people's behavior in a healthier way. Uh, Sort of one person changing another person's behavior, but there's something a little paternalistic about it, and so I prefer the idea of giving people evidence-based tools to change their own lives, right,
Mm,
that they can apply when
mm,
they need them.
mm.
And so I, I I certainly, when I gave that talk, had no idea. You don't even know if your talk will be posted.
Right.
So you certainly have no idea if 500,000 people will watch it. And that seems terrifying, and certainly not 38 million.
Yeah.
Um, so that just went way beyond my wildest expectations. What the 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 unfortunate thing about it is that, you know, um, you're when you give a talk like that, you're sort of stuck, you're suspended in time.
Mm,
And I gave a talk on what we knew in 2012, and now we know a lot more. And I also understand the 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 phenomenon to be much broader than stand like Wonder Woman for 2 minutes. I mean, one
right.
thing is that the hormones findings are really fragile. So we've seen uh, there are three studies that show them and two that don't
Mm-hmm.
show the effects on hormones. So I didn't realize how sticky the hormones findings would be for people.
Mm,
Like, people really find that interesting.
mm-hmm.
And to me, the fact that it changes the way you feel is more important. If
Yeah.
hormones are the mechanism, okay, that's interesting, but not the most important piece. Um, but the other is that it's a much bigger idea. I mean, the idea is that how you carry yourself, you choose to carry yourself with grace and poise and pride, then you carry out your interactions with grace and poise and pride.
Mm,
It's not just about standing with your hands on your hips for 2 minutes.
right.
It's about standing up straight. There's a great Maya Angelou quote: stand up straight and realize who you are, that you tower over your circumstances.
Right.
And to
Right.
me, that captures it. So I kind of wish I had uh, been able to communicate that broader idea. I am able to do that now, but the talk that people watch from 4.5 years ago will always
Mm,
be limited.
mm-hmm. All right. Well, here's another question uh, that I think your followers would love to know. In your experience as either a researcher or as a book author, is there a revealing or humorous story you can tell us that only a few people know?
Yes. So I was getting my hair cut. I was going to be doing this interview for a television show, and I was talking about. And I was a little bit, I was a little bit nervous about this interview. It was something I cared about quite a bit, and I was telling the hairstylist about it, and she said, "Oh, well, you have to." There's a way that you can get ready to do this. And she's like, and I'm also a yoga teacher, so I know about this stuff. And she said, okay, I watched this talk, and if you're nervous about something like this, you got to put your hands on your hips and stand there for 2 minutes. And she's like, and we all have these experiences, so don't feel bad. And I said, I know. I said, I'm her. And she goes, I know, aren't we all? And so to her, it meant, she thought I was saying, I am the person who needs this.
Yeah,
But I was trying to say, no, that's my talk. And
that's
then
my
she goes,
research.
oh my God. Oh, oh
Yeah,
shoot, you are
yeah,
that person,
right.
literally. And I said, yeah, but I thought it was great. I was
That
like, thank
is
you. It is good advice.
that
Thank
is
you for
funny.
reminding me of my own advice.
Yeah. As you know, I've written a book, Pre-Suasion. You actually were kind enough to offer an endorsement of it. It explores what communicators can do before delivering a message to increase its acceptance. So, for my final question, can you describe a situation in which as a communicator, and now it could be you or it could be somebody else, when that communicator said or did something first that led to the success of an immediately subsequent appeal?
I have to tell the story about someone else who has really influenced me,
Sure.
um, and how he approaches things. And so what I love, again, I love your work, and this idea is so consistent with my idea that we build trust before we deliver information, that you have
Right.
to build trust as a conduit of
Mm.
influence. And if you
Yeah.
don't do that, it's nearly impossible to influence anyone. I mean, if they
Right.
don't think that you understand them, why would they
Yeah.
listen to you? Why would they, take your prescription? And so the greatest example that I have come across is from a Baptist minister named Jeffrey Brown, who was part of a a movement called the Boston Miracle in the early 90s, where gang violence had escalated to beyond where it had ever been. There were more than 100 youth deaths in one year,
Mm.
and no one knew what to do. And everyone kept bringing in experts, and people had good intentions. They
Yeah.
wanted to change things,
Sure.
but they would bring in experts. They would have lockdown. They'd have after school programs. They tried community policing. All of these things didn't work. And finally, these three young Black Baptist ministers who had been going to these meetings to talk about what to do realized that what they needed to do was to listen to the young people, to the
Mm.
to the gang members themselves.
Mm.
And so, uh, this is a longer term process, but there are also many short term examples of how this worked. And what Jeffrey and these two other young ministers did was they would walk the streets from 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. every Saturday night, and they would just sit and listen. They would listen. They had no
Mm.
agenda. So the
Mm.
action was to listen
Mm.
rather than to talk.
Mm.
And by listening, it immediately opened up these young people to them. They trusted them. And so when they then requested information, Jeffrey and these two other young men, um, the kids were much more likely to offer the information,
Right.
to tell them how they felt. So
Right.
it's listening first,
Yeah.
listening as an action. It and I tell my students all the time, listen first. You don't have to take the floor right away.
Right.
It's okay. It's not going anywhere. And by just simply listening, you're immediately opening people up to you,
Yeah.
right? So you're also collecting information. But so I have so many examples that for me, it would be listening as the action immediately before the request.
Right.
It's
Right.
incredibly powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that what you said was really insightful. That while we may think that the primary benefit of listening, genuinely listening, is to collect the requisite information to allow us to move forward with some kind of a plan, it's something more primitive than that.
I
It's
absolutely
the
agree.
willingness to be open to
That's right.
accepting the information that the other individual is providing that's so beneficial to what
I
happens
agree.
next.
And the outcome of this approach of listening to these young people, to these gang members, was that gang violence dropped dramatically in
Mm.
Boston. And many economists and sociologists have studied this, thinking it can't be, but actually it is. That's what happened.
Yeah.
It was that approach of listening first, that helped
Gr-
them solve the problem.
Great example. Yeah.
Thank you. Anyway,
All right.
thank you.
I'm glad we had the chance. And I
Yeah, me
hope we
too.
get a chance to spend some time at a conference or something
grab
I'd love to
lunch or
do that.
yeah, let's try to do that.
Okay,
All
we
right.
will.
All right.
And any opportunity. Thank you so much. Bye.
So long for now.